consumer's perspective. So that's you and what happens when you find a property that you're interested in, and where does it go from there. So we've got some expert panelists to really take us through the whole process. Before we get started though, I wanted to hand over to the brilliant Cecilia from Westpac to do introductions, and then we'll be back.
Thank you, Nabila. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Cecilia Montrado, and I'm the Westpac State Manager for Home Lending, New South Wales and ACT. Before we dive into today, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of this beautiful land on which we are all meeting today, wherever you may be joining us from. For me, that is on the land of the Dharawal people, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'd like to welcome everyone along to today's Lunch and Learn session, especially anyone new to the Ruby community. Thank you for your time. Whether you are starting your financial journey, you're establishing a family, investing, thinking of purchasing a property, or maybe winding down to retirement, Ruby is an empowering and welcoming place to share and learn. Today, we are on our final session in our two-part series into home ownership. We will cover what to expect with the home buying journey, top tips on finance, bidding and going for an auction, what's the deal with conveyancing, how to pay off your mortgage effectively. So please pop questions in the chat if you have them. With that, I would like to thank you again and hand back to our host Nabila to dive into today's discussion.
Thank you, Cecilia. Before we get started, I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. But first of all, let me just remind you that the information that we're sharing today is very general in nature, and for specific financial advice, you should obviously speak to your financial advisor about your specific case. We know that buying a home has been on a lot of people's minds lately. We've talked a lot about affordability. It's been a key topic in the election campaign as well, and particularly since the RBA raised rates for the first time in 10 years last week. So it's a good time to really delve into this topic. Let's start with our panelists. Let's start with you, Cate. You are a buyer's advocate. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Absolutely. It's great to be presenting alongside, and it's wonderful to be talking to other women about what we all do. So a buyer's advocate is someone who assists with the purchasing side of property. And you'll be familiar with real estate agents. They're working for the vendor. And while they can be really helpful with buyers, they're still not responsible for looking after buyers, and they answer to their vendor. So someone in my role balances the playing field, and we can do everything from auction bidding to helping with strategy, full searching, uncovering off markets, and obviously negotiating and dealing with agents. And we work across a lot of different areas. Some advocates will be focused on one particular area. Some will also be quite skilled at investment purchasing. So we come in all shapes and sizes, but we work for the buyer.
Thank you. Michelle, you're a conveyancer. What does your job entail?
I certainly am, and thank you for having me, and hello everyone. A conveyancer handles all the legal processes associated with transferring property. Now that can stem from looking at a contract before auction for a client right through to the settlement process. Involved in that are obviously checks on the legal title and also various negotiation skills, and then some administrative work to take that the matter through from exchange through the settlement platform through to settlement.
Thank you. And Lucinda, you're a home finance manager. Can you tell us a little bit about your job too?
Yes, I am. Hello, and thank you for that. So essentially, I am here to help you get your finance. So throughout your home buying journey, together we'll understand in terms of how much we can borrow. From there, essentially, we'll narrow down in terms of where we're looking to buy, and with your deposit, what sort of purchases we're looking at. And throughout your home buying journey, usually as a home finance manager, we'll help you with some reports to get understanding on the actual report that you are looking at and the suburb itself as well. So pretty much A to Z in terms of our finance.
Great. Well, let's delve right into the questions. Guys, I have some specific questions for our panelists, but you can ask questions too. Please pop them in the chat box and we will do our best to get to them before the end of the session today. Cate, let's start with you. So what are the top 3 things I should be considering when I'm trying to narrow down what property is right for me?
The first one is location, working out if that is a driver for your decision making, because if it is, you've then got to work out what sort of dwelling you're dealing with within your desired price range in that location. So I think that's the first one. And if we get location wrong, it can lead us to having to unravel a purchase decision, and that in itself is quite an expensive thing to have to do. The next one is your future proofing of the property, or the tenure. So if you're looking at holding it for at least 5 years and ideally 10, then I think that's a fantastic and very safe purchase decision, because you're giving yourself a long time to hold that property and to ride any waves of market fluctuation as well. But if you're not future proofing the property, or you're only doing it for a short term solution, you could be throwing away a lot of money. You're dealing with stamp duty and agents, selling fees, marketing, etc., and lost opportunity. And then the last thing to consider is outgoings, because the cost of holding that property needs to be taken into consideration. If you haven't paid attention to that and you've got large outgoings, they might be high owners corporation fees or other taxes, etc., then that can make it a difficult property to hold for the long term. So when your eyes are wide open, you know what it's costing you, you know how long you'd ideally like to hold it, and you know where you want to be. They're the three fundamentals that can make for a great decision.
Thanks, Cate. Lucinda, we've all been hooked on Lux listings, and we've been perving on the properties that we would like to buy perhaps, but can you tell us a little bit about how to figure out how much we can borrow when it comes to buying the home that we want?
Yes, definitely. I've been hooked onto Lux listings myself. It's pretty crazy. But just as in terms of understanding how much we can borrow, you've got essentially two options. One, you can look at online calculators. However, if you don't get in front of the lenders, which is option 2, it's probably best. Reason being is that as lenders, we'd understand your full financial position, and the online calculators, they don't ask the nitty gritty, such as, you know, how many children you may have, or whether you have other commitments that aren't listed like HEX. So sitting in front of a lender and having that holistic conversation is probably the best way to go in terms of understanding how much you can borrow.
And how do the banks calculate the serviceability? Could you tell us a little bit about what are some of the factors to think about when it comes to that, you know, foreign property or other assets or share market ownership, you know, ownership of shares or anything like that? Like, how should we look at it?
Definitely. So serviceability, honestly, are just 3 main components. 1 is our income, 2 is our commitments, and 3 is our household details. Now, when we look at incomes, of course, we can look at your, you know, base PAYG income, your self-employed income, but also the other things that we have as, you know, a lot of investing, you've got your dividends. So as a bank, we also do look at that in terms of income. Now, commitments as well, we pretty much look at all commitments, any credit facilities, and your household details. We talk about, you know, what do our monthly living expenses look like? Do our children go to private school? So those sort of things impact our serviceability. Now, a lot of people do tend to think that our deposit helps our serviceability as well. It doesn't. It just helps our purchase price, right? So, for example, if you can service a certain amount, that deposit that we have will help determine your purchase price in terms of we add that on top, and it kind of gets an answer there.
Right, okay. Cate, back to you. You were talking about future-proofing a purchase. What are some of the factors to think about in terms of things that influence the value of property going forward?
Okay, there's quite a few things that can influence property values, and we all like to think about capturing the things that help our property grow. And things that make properties grow might not be necessarily what we assume out there. But when a property has broad mainstream appeal, so lots of people, imagine taking your property to auction, you want to have a street full of people who want to be auction participants. And so if it's got broad mainstream appeal and there's nothing about it that's turning people away, that's the first thing that drives value growth. The next one is scarcity. Now, we don't want it to be weird scarce, but we want it to be beautiful scarce. So again, if it's a property that isn't a dime a dozen and it is quite special, they come up reasonably frequently, but there's not thousands of them on the market for sale at any one time. If you combine that with broad owner-occupier appeal, it means that you'll have a lot of people gathering around at that auction with their checkbooks, and they'll also be thinking, it's so scarce, I really want it. How much am I prepared to stretch my budget for it? they're the people that you always need to be thinking about when you're purchasing a property for capital growth, because ultimately they're the ones that you might be up against now, but they're the ones that will fight for the property one day when you sell it. And the last one that I think is really important is a factor that can, I guess, derail a property's value or have a property become a harder property to sell. So it might lose value, or it might not perform at the same rate. We don't want a property to underperform. And detractors come in all different shapes and sizes, but when they're invisible detractors, that's something that's really important to know. And a good thorough contract review with a conveyancer or solicitor will help you uncover some of the invisible ones. They might be difficult zoning or a strange title type that the banks don't like. And I've got a saying that I often use: I don't buy properties that the banks don't like. It's because if a bank is prepared to say no, or if they've got more scrutiny that they're applying, it will reduce the buyer pool, and buyers will be really cautious about that. So aside from obvious detractors, things that you can see others won't like, it might be really busy, loud surrounds or main roads, or it's located near something that's undesirable. You've also got to look out for the negative detractors. They're all of the things that can influence property prices.
Thanks, Cate. So Michelle, over to you. So Cate has found me a home that I really like the look of, and Lucinda has said she will loan me all the money that I need to buy one of those luxe listings. And so over to you next. What do I need to do in terms of making sure that it's the right property for me? Like, what are the things that the seller has to disclose, and what are some of the things that me as a buyer have that I have to investigate to make sure that I'm not getting, you know, a dodgy deal, basically?
The very first thing you should do is have that contract, whether it's with the agent for marketing, sent through to your conveyancer so they can commence review on the contract. At the same time, that would generally go through to the banker, and they could start the approval process from pre-approval through to formal approval, which might be when the valuation, if required, is carried out. The other important aspects to look at are any inspections. In New South Wales, we would need to consider things like pest and building, strata inspections, even electrical and plumbing. We need to carry out due diligence so that we can ensure that we discover or detect any issue that may not have been disclosed by the vendor. In the situation of the vendor, what is the vendor required to disclose to the purchaser? There are certain prescribed documents, and this will vary from state to state, that are required to be in each contract for sale. Within New South Wales, it's a full title search with copies of all the dealings that are noted on the title. It's a 10.7, or otherwise known as a zoning certificate, a sewer diagram, and also we have a swimming pool certificate of compliance or non-compliance that is now required in New South Wales to be attached. So with those various documents, there's a number of things you can find out about a property. A prudent conveyancer or solicitor would look through those things and certainly raise a red flag if there was anything that you needed to stop and consider before you moved beyond the offer and acceptance stage into more of an unconditional contract. Does that answer your question? I could go a little bit deeper if you want me to in terms of what a vendor is required to disclose, but we can leave it there too. Can't hear you.
I was just saying, why don't we go quickly into okay. Just yeah, sorry.
Yes, certainly. So for example, if you were buying a home, let's think about we're buying a home, it's been recently built. It may have had all the approvals to be built, and we can see that it's been approved by the local council and the building has been completed in our view. When we dig a little bit deeper, we find out that the building has not ever had an occupation certificate, so a final inspection certificate, and perhaps some of those structures on the land have not been built in accordance with the original approval. If you were selling a home and you were a vendor and you knew that your house didn't comply with council regulations, sometimes it's important to disclose that as well. It's not a legal requirement, but it shows intention that the property is sold not in a fully complete state, but in a partially complete form. And that can prevent a purchaser from being able to renegotiate price at a later date, because a purchaser will have rights in New South Wales against an owner for any works that are illegal building works. It's actually a breach of the implied warranty that you have as a vendor selling property in New South Wales. So that brings to mind the importance of engaging a solicitor or conveyancer who does specialise in these areas of law and understands the intricacies and the strategies that you can use to benefit yourself.
Thanks, Michelle. That's really helpful to know.
My pleasure.
Lucinda, over to you. Obviously, this process can be quite competitive, and having everything lined up, you know, in a timely fashion is very important. So, can you give us some tips as to how to get that pre-approval for the loan very quickly from the bank, and what are the bits of information that we need to have ready?
Definitely. So the great thing about the pre-approval is that with lenders, we do tend to verify as much as we can before you go and put in any offers on properties. So what we mean by that, in terms of understanding your borrowing power, that pre-approval gives you that, you know, that confirmation for you to go put down offers on properties. Now, in order to be organized and get that pre-approval fairly quickly, it's definitely great to have your pay slips ready and getting an understanding of what your commitments are. Now, a lot of people do tend to think that, you know, having a credit card facility that they haven't used in years that is still active won't impact them. But as banks, we do look at the actual credit limit. So understanding in terms of what credit facilities that you have, and then, you know, what you may need to close. But I'll probably say the most important thing are your pay slips. Reason being is that you may, you know, not understand your full salary correctly in terms of whether super's involved or whether we do have any deductions. So us as lenders will make sure that in terms of what's showing on your pay slips will reflect your borrowing power, and that way that pre-approval will be 100% solid. So when you go put down that offer on that property, it's not going to be too long for us to get formal approval. So pay slips and commitment details as well.
And there can be a lot of hidden costs in the process, can't there? Lucinda, can you tell us a little bit about some of the costs that we need to take into account when we're really allocating how much money do I need to buy a home? Because it's not just about the deposit, is it?
Definitely. So definitely speak to your lender in terms of what your upfront costs could be. So your upfront cost, of course, would include your solicitor fees, any report fees such as strata if we're looking to buy a unit, and our pest inspections as well. So essentially what we do is, you know, if I would say on average your you know, solicitor fees, I'm sure Michelle can confirm, is around 12 to 500. Now, what we do is we add that on top of our deposit. Reason being is that we want to make sure that you've got your deposit ready, but also for everything else. So once we add our solicitor fees, our like report fees for your strata reports, those are the kind of fees to look at. In terms of banking fees, usually with banks these days, a lot of the fees are waived. So I wouldn't say there should be any hidden fees. Usually the lender will go through what costs are applicable. But essentially the main fees that a lot of people do tend to forget about are the what comes after we put down an offer on a property in terms of the reports that we need to get sorted.
Got it. And there's a lot of acronyms when it comes to this and a lot of jargon. Let me throw one at you, LMI. What does it mean? Can you explain it to us, please?
Definitely. So LMI is long for lender's mortgage insurance. So essentially what that is if, for example, if you're looking to borrow more than 80% on a property value, that's essentially classified as high risk as a bank. So the bank has an insurance, which is called lender's mortgage insurance, which comes out of your pocket in order to cover the bank for unforeseeable events, you know, a crisis of some sort. Hopefully that doesn't happen, of course. But essentially what happens with the lender's mortgage insurance, the cost differs depending on how large our deposit is. So anything more than 80% usually is incurred. And then when capitalized onto the loan, it'll be automatically calculated in terms of our repayments as well. So it's essentially that additional cost of insurance for the bank. Now, in order to avoid that lender's mortgage insurance charge, is simply to have a 20% deposit.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Michelle, we've got a question from the audience for you. Could you kindly run us through the First Home Super Saver scheme just very quickly and tell us whether it can be used to save for a deposit for an investment property?
So that's the newest scheme that you're referring to in relation to first home buyers. And I understand there's been, generally I would go directly for New South Wales. Are we speaking, in which jurisdiction are we talking? So where's our question coming from? Which state?
I don't know which state. Maybe seeing as most of us are in New South Wales, maybe we just cover off New South Wales and Victoria.
Yeah, so basically I would always refer to New South Wales Revenue for the most up-to-date information in relation to any of the first home buyer schemes. Then I would also check with the broker or lender as to whether or not they're part of that scheme. So the direct question was, could I take you through that? It's not necessarily a big part of what I would do. I would certainly check that the client is able to be part of that scheme in conjunction with the borrower or lender. And perhaps Lucinda has more information that she could share from a bank's perspective in terms of how they agree that this person can be part of the scheme, because it's a little bit beyond the scope of what we do. It's not really legal work as such, but we do assist with that process, absolutely.
Okay, Lucinda or Cate, if you have information on that, feel free to jump in.
I can add on a bit for Michelle. So essentially, it's not all banks are part of this scheme, depending on what scheme it is. But essentially, you do have a couple. Now, the federal government has given for example, 10,000 spots for first home buyers, only for owner occupiers, so not for investment guys, where you're able to have a small deposit, like a 5% deposit, and the government will guarantee 15% to avoid that lender's mortgage insurance. Now, like I said, exactly like what Michelle said, we look at the revenue website and it will give you a list of the eligible panelists that are part of the scheme. But essentially, it's less deposit, no lender's mortgage insurance with the government-backed guarantees, but also with a limited amount of spaces as well. So there's a registry that you'd have to go through.
Cate, a question for you from the audience. With a number of brokers out there, what should we look for in a good mortgage broker?
Okay, we've got to make sure that the product or products that are being recommended are tailored to us, and every single borrower is different. So if there's any quirks to someone's eligibility for a loan, and there are lots of quirks out there, whether it's self-employed or a visa status or how long you've been in a job, etc. You've got to make sure that you're confident that your broker has understood all of your financial background and details. You've also got to make sure that you're getting the loan product that you want. It's not just about rate. There's other offerings, and I'm a big fan of offset, and I'll scream it from the rooftops, particularly if there's a chance that you're looking to either have the property as an investment or a future investment, or if you've already got investments. So I think the critical thing is having a broker that understands exactly what you're trying to achieve. You want to be certain that they've asked a broad array of questions about your financial background and position. And you also need to know that what they're recommending is obviously the right product for you. And it helps if you've got a plan B option there, should you want to consider a couple of options. But having a super wide variety of options isn't necessarily helpful either. I've seen people get confused from that kind of outcome.
And it can be quite a convoluted process. And we've talked a lot about the searching for a home phase. Cate, what do you think about when I've found a place? What happens when I want to make an offer?
Okay. A lot of different things can happen because agents are then holding the power. They've got your offer. So the first thing that I want to be really clear about is it's not a real offer unless it's on a contract. There's no point saying I sent them a text message or I gave them a verbal or I sent an email. It has to be on a contract. And that means you're committing to that. If the vendor says yes and signs it, you've got an executed contract. But you shouldn't be throwing around offers until you're certain about it anyway and you've done all of your due diligence. So let's assume you've made a real offer, you've submitted a genuine offer on a contract with a consideration, and a consideration means part payment of your deposit. In the old days, we used to attach checks, but it might be making an EFT transfer into their agency trust account for $1,000 or whatever the minimum is that they're requesting. You've then got to ask the agent, when are you getting back to me? What's your time frame? Because in a competitive market, they might have multiple offers. In a non-competitive market, they might be so happy to get your offer and they'll zoom straight over to the vendor's house and get it signed off. These days, things happen electronically as well. A lot of agents have their own platforms and they'll send you your offer in an email and you'll be clicking through in an electronic format. So make sure if you've introduced any conditions or if you've wanted to be subject to anything, it's all there. Once they've got the offer, you won't know how they'll treat it unless you ask them. So I always do that before I hand over an offer. And all I say to the agent is, when do you anticipate presenting the offer to the vendor? Is mine the only offer that you're presenting? And if they say, no, I've got others or I'm expecting others, I then say, well, how are you treating competitive offers. Because if the agent says, well, you get one chance and it's best and highest, you want to make sure it is your best and highest offer. Because if you think you're kicking off a negotiation and then they turn around and say, well, someone beat you by $10,000, you'd be devastated if you had that $10,000. However, if the agent says, no, we're receiving all offers and then we'll have a Zoom auction, or we'll go back and forth and we'll call you until the last person stands, well, clearly you're not going to give them your very best offer. So it's all about understanding the agent's rules and how they'll be treating your offer. And things are a little different when you make an offer on a property that's scheduled for auction. You absolutely need to know, first and foremost, whether you're working under auction conditions or not. Because if you're a certain number of days away from an auction, depending on what state you're in, you may not have a cooling off period. And if the agent is determined not to have the property sold before the auction, you need to work out whether you're making a mistake by trying to trigger a process you'll be resented for, or whether you've actually got the right offer that will tempt the vendor to take your offer, and you need to know how the agent will deal with other people. It's all about asking questions before you hand an offer over.
And there's so much strategic thinking and psychology involved, isn't there? And you just mentioned that mistakes that people can make. What are some of the key mistakes that you've seen being made from a buyer's perspective, and what are some of the things that you sort of warn people to watch out for?
Great question. I think the first and biggest mistake I say people make are avoiding auctions or avoiding a competition. I sometimes have clients saying, oh, if it's going to be a Dutch auction, I'm not getting involved. Well, if it's a good property, it should have competition. And if it's a hot market and a good property, it absolutely will have competition. So don't roll over or go for an easy property to get when you're going for a great quality property that deserves competition. Just understand your competition. And avoiding auctions, I think, is a crazy decision in a hot auction market, especially in our auction capitals. I'm based in Melbourne, and if I avoided auctions, I wouldn't buy very many properties. And sometimes when you're at auction, you can buy really well. It all happens very quickly, and there's this split-second decisions that you're making as a professional bidder. And I often buy at auction with additional money left over in my maximum bidding limit budget. Every now and then I'll land right on my number, or someone else might beat me. But auctions are transparent. There's no games being played once you're out in the street. The other mistake I see people making is listening to too many people. If you need your parents to help you make a significant property decision, that's one thing. But if they're disagreeing with what you're trying to achieve, or if they're not understanding, or if they're not supporting you in the way that you need support, then get a better support person. And by all means, don't listen to multitudes of people, because we all have different opinions on everything. You've just got to have someone that you trust, that you know has your best interests at heart. And I think the last one is feeling that you can throw an offer out or derail an agent's campaign. Threatening the agent or throwing your weight around when the agent's really firm about something can end badly, because ultimately they do have quite a lot of power. So you've got to work out how to work with them.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. It's a tricky sort of industry for all of you ladies to work in. You know, there's a lot of sort of machinations behind the scene, and like you say, you know, people that's the strategy and various different sort of plotting and pulling and pushing going on behind the scenes. A question from the audience: how do you know if the other offers are genuine? Like, can you take things at face value?
I get this question all the time. In a hot market, an agent's not likely to be bluffing about other offers. And it's not something that you want to test, because if you think they might be and you call their bluff and they've actually signed up another offer, you'll be very remorseful. If you're really feeling that you can't trust them, or there's been a trust breach there, you can say to them, look, I'm so nervous about this. I've had this bad experience. Can I please see evidence of the other offer? And they might black out the name and the signature, but be prepared to show you that contract. Generally, though, there's someone in the agency that I'll know and like and get along well with, and I'll just ask them if it's for real, if I've got any of those concerns. But in a hot market where there's competitive bidding activity, it's highly unlikely an agent would bluff.
That's good to know. Thank you. I might get Lucinda and Michelle to jump in on this next one. In light of everything that's going on in the market and with the RBA raising rates and more rate rises potentially to come, what is a good time to get into the market?
Oh, that's actually a very good
Get
question.
your crystal balls out, ladies.
Well, to be honest, the way I see it as a lender is that the time to buy is when you're ready. So speaking to a lender, we'll know whether you're ready or not, whether we have that deposit, whether we have that borrowing power, and whether the area that you are looking at has some available properties. So it's not like we can say, you know, now or next week's the best time to buy, because you usually see those people who are, oh, we'll just wait for the, you know, like the economy to cool off a bit, but then all of a sudden, you know, everything goes up even higher. So as a lender, we would say you're ready to buy when you're comfortable, when you see things that you like that are on the market, when you know that you can afford it, after speaking with a lender as well. Michelle, what about you?
I would have to say 12 months ago. Because we recently, I think COVID's a really good example of prediction that that we'd see the market crash and there'd be property values would plummet. Here in Lake Macquarie, I'm in Newcastle, we saw a rise of 30% in values of property. So in effect, quite the opposite happened. So I think you're right. It's when you're ready. It's when you have the capacity to borrow, but not overextending yourself, because you need to allow for that provision for those interest rates to rise. And there'll be a lot more pressure on living in general, I believe, in the next couple of years, which is going to, I don't know if lenders are going to change their parameters around borrowing or capacity, but I trust they will. So I think that if it's serviceable and you find something that you like and it's what you want, then why wait?
Yeah.
There. Sorry, just look, we are out of time, guys. It's 1 o'clock and we didn't get to a lot of the questions, but we will try to address them in our follow-up correspondence. And you can get a lot of the answers through the Ruby Connection website as well. Thank you so much to all our panelists, Cate, Lucinda and Michelle. We will just go and try and find a time machine to go back a year so we can buy something. But for those of us who can't, we'll keep following the Ruby website to see, to get some better advice as well coming in the coming days and weeks and months to come. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Have a lovely weekend.